Foreman reporting there on the weapons of war. Now, from the weapons of war to the legality of the whole thing, the US Senate is voting on the president's authority to wage war without congressional approval. This is known as a procedural vote, and it's focused on the War Powers Act of the 1970s. Despite the intensity of the military operation, now in its fifth day, according to the Republican leadership, it isn't a war.
An American submarine sunk an Iranian warship that thought it was safe in international waters. Instead, it was sunk by a torpedo. Quiet death. The first sinking of an enemy ship by a torpedo since World War II. Like in that war, back when we were still the War Department, we are fighting to win.
It's not a declaration of war. It's not something that the president was required, because it's defensive in nature and in design and in necessity, to come to Congress and get a vote first. And if they had briefed a larger group than the Gang of Eight, there's a real threat that very sensitive intelligence that we had, might have been leaked or something.
When is a war not a war? Jeff Swartz is a law professor and former Florida judge. Looks like a war, sounds like a war, but it's not a war. What's the significance of the War Powers Act here?
Well, the War Powers Act deals with something short of a declaration of war. It gives the president the ability to use his Article 2 powers to defend the United States against what has been described now as being an imminent attack or an actual attack on the United States. This is the basic idea that the administration is using. They want to use their Article 2 powers. They think that the War Powers Act is unconstitutional as a limitation on his powers. And so therefore, they don't want anything coming out of the House and the Senate that they're going to have to deal with.
But the War Powers Act, if that's passed, restricts the president from what he can do. It's a limited number of days before he has to bring the 60 to 90 days or whatever it is before he has to. So the passing the War Powers Act is a restriction on the constitutional ability. They're voting at the moment whether they pass it or not, and Clever Money seems to think that they won't pass it. If they don't pass it, does that give him carte blanche?
It does for a period of time. I don't see any other way to make him stop doing what he's doing. It's one of those things where if Congress, again, chooses to abdicate its powers to declare war to the right of the executive to do whatever they want with the military, then we are one step closer to absolutism.
I mean, let's strip away the legality of it. As I understand it, the US torpedoed a ship 1,600 miles from the battle of, or the field of conflict at the moment in the Gulf. It was off the coast of Sri Lanka, by all accounts. Now, there is an argument like the Belgrano. You could say, well, it was steaming towards or it was steaming away or whatever. But it doesn't sound like there was an imminent threat within the theater of war.
No. Right. No, it was not. This is one of two things. If this is not a war, then there was no justification, even under the president's Article 2 powers, to torpedo this ship and put it at the bottom of the Indian Ocean. That just doesn't exist. If it is a war, then of course it is an act of war against a belligerent, and as a result of which the president and or the military had the power to do what they were doing. But it's one or the other. And since there is no declaration of war, it can't be a war.
But Judge, the significance here is the War Powers Act came out of the 1970s, and it came out of the Vietnam War to prevent the never-ending wars that took place. It's not been used terribly successfully, but there have been resolutions, Gulf War I, Gulf War II, and others, where Congress has approved of the fighting.
All of those resolutions actually, believe it or not, were repealed in December. And when they were repealed, Donald Trump signed those repeals. So he clearly is taking the position, which was espoused by his Secretary of State, that the War Powers Act is unconstitutional and I can do what I need to do to defend the United States.
Is it likely that the constitutionality of the War Powers Act, I realize there's a moot element to this because the fighting is taking place at the moment, but is there a de juris possibility that it ends up before the Supreme Court, sorry, a de facto possibility it ends up before the Supreme Court?
The only way that's going to happen is if they pass this bill that's presently in front of the House and the Senate, and then the president would have to go to court to declare that the War Powers Act is unconstitutional. Therefore, anything passed in relation thereto is also unconstitutional. But I don't sense that these are going to pass at this point, so I don't think that's
forgive me, but they're not going to pass, or at least it seems like that way to us as well.
No,
Judge, thank you very much. As usual, send the bill to the usual place.